Hi, welcome to 2020 Tasty Treats. We're doing 20 Christmas ideas at the moment and we're just doing amazingly well. We're doing idea number 16 at this stage, and what we're doing is this Santa guy. He is very happy to be here. Now, there is a pattern for those of you who are interested on GourmetQuilter.com. The patterns are downloadable, so the pattern is for all 20 ideas. We're doing a video each day and a pattern each day for 20 days, and we are up to day 16. So to do this little Santa guy, the pattern has all the information and stuff and the shapes included in it. So I've gone ahead, I've cut out, I've done a little bit of the work, but not very much. So what we've got is Santa wearing a sort of a coat type thing over the top of a kind of a tall sort of, I guess we'll call him a body. He doesn't have any feet, he just stands quite nicely though. So to make him, there's a body shape, and I've cut all that out. So this is the body shape, and then there's going to be the coat that he wears on top as well. So it just seemed to make sense to make it matching in colour and things like that. It was just easier. So I've gone ahead and cut them out. I've cut out his face. This is his head here. These are his arms. So I've already actually made one arm ready, and I'll show you how we do that when we get to that point. Right now we're going to make the body. We're going to first of all stitch his head on. He likes to have a head. So the head simply gets stitched onto this top edge here. So these pieces will fit quite nicely there. So we'll go ahead and do this. So he's a little bit of work, but he's not too bad. He's kind of a little bit easier than you think he's going to be, which is really good. So we've got both halves of the head there now, and so now I'm going to I want to press that seam down into the body rather than up into the head. And so we're going to stitch those right sides together all the way around, but first of all we do need to make a little gap so that we can turn them out the right way. So on the pattern piece will be some markings for where to cut the slit. So in the centre, I'm just folded over in the centre because it's easier to mark from the centre here. Oops, get it around this way so you can see. So it's not absolutely critical because it's just somewhere under his coat, but we just want a line somewhere in the middle of what will be his back that we're going to cut. So just with some scissors, before we sew it together, I'm just going to cut down there. This doesn't get seen, it's completely hidden, so it's all good. So now we want to stitch these right sides together. So I can go ahead and do this. We're just going to start from one side, come all the way up around the top of the head and round to here and stop, and then we're going to stitch that bottom edge there. So I'll go ahead and get that done and show you how we do those bottom bits after that. So I've gone ahead and done the sewing that I said. I've done along the bottom, but I haven't done anything with the corners yet. But before I forget, I just wanted to clip into these little curves here. So we just want to clip around his shoulders here. And then around the top of the head here. So I've clipped into the little corner there and again. But then we can just trim the head to maybe about 1/8 of an inch all the way around, because that curve will sit much better if it's trimmed down. Although we don't see the curve, we don't see his head particularly. He's got a magnificent head of hair, plus he's got a hat. However, we need to know it's going to work. So this piece here we can open out, and you can get in through this little slit that we cut if we need to. So we're just really making the paper bag corners, but we've already trimmed the corners off. So what we're doing is opening this piece out, bringing the two seams together, and then we're going to stitch across that piece on both ends there. So I'll get that done now as well. So he's now got that sort of flat base on him, which is kind of convenient because he'll stand on that nicely. So I'm just going to turn him out the right way now, and then we can fill him up. It's as easy as that. So we'll push that head out. Run your finger around that curve, will help that sit out nicely, but it will push out when we fill it anyway. So I'm going to suggest, I'm going to fill it halfway up at least, probably with the crushed walnut shell. You don't have to use crushed walnut shell, you may have something else. You might find that rice or linseed or anything like that works for you. It doesn't work for me so well because I find that little critters out in the country like to find things like that and munch on them, which is not helpful for me at all. But walnut shell is, I'm guessing, largely inedible because I don't think anything eats the walnut shell. I'm guessing that's why nuts have shells, so that things don't eat them. So I'm just going to fill him, as I said, probably about halfway with this walnut shell. So I've just got my funnel. It'll take a bit because it's kind of a large area. So I'll go ahead and do this, and then I'm going to put some fibre fill in, so I'll show you how I go about doing that as well. So I've he's about halfway filled. You don't want to fill up with anything loose like the shell above your hole because it'll all just fall out again. So we're going to fill the rest of him up now with some fibre fill. And we're just going to take small bits. We're going to start with his head first and work down. So I found that the best way with filling like this is to just use small bits and to push it in as far as you can. And we want his head reasonably firmly filled. Won't be just as easy with my fingers at this stage. So you can push that shell down a little bit as well and give it a good squidge, make sure it's gone into the base nicely. And he takes a reasonable amount of, he's quite hungry, this Santa. He takes quite a bit of walnut shell and he takes quite a bit of filling. Because it squashes down fairly well. And this, as I said, this isn't going to show. He has that sort of coat over the top, so all of this will be covered up. So he's coming along nicely. He's filled out quite well. He's bursting at the seams at the back here. But so I'm just going to hand sew that close. As I said, this is all covered up so you don't see it. So this works really well for this sort of thing, to cut a slit rather than leaving gaps and things. It's just as easy to do it this way. So all I'm doing is just going to catch it on each side, and that'll pull in as we go up. And it's fine if there's a little pleat at the bottom or something. As I said, you don't see this, it's fully covered up. So it's just a matter of closing the gap. Now I should mention also, while we're talking about filling, anything where there's a neck, any dolls or Santas or anything like that where there's a neck, you want to make sure the neck is fairly firmly filled, because it's the one area that can start giving way with a little bit of handling and things. So keep an eye on necks. We want to be stiff-necked. So I'll go ahead and get this finished. You know what I'm doing now, and I'll show you how to do the arms. So I've gone ahead and I've stitched up that little gap in the back, and I've actually already put one arm on. So I've got the other arm ready here just to show you how we do it. So it was just a strip twice as wide as that. It's folded over here, and I've already done the stitching. I just folded up 1/4 inch on one end so that when we join it in, it's already folded. We've got to turn it out the right way, and that's going to be this top edge up here. And then we're just curving it on the bottom there, so we can just trim all that off now. So it's just got a little curved edge where his hand is. Other than that, it's just folded at the end, seamed up here, but curved at the top end there. And so then we just need to turn it out the right way, and we've got to put some filling in that as well. And then after that, I think all the filling will be done. Try and get this hand to go through. These things are a little bit fiddly, so I usually like to try and just get the point started with something, and then it should feed onto the stick like that. That's it. Pull that out, but we'll push that little hand out at the end. And this little folded edge, just encourage it to fold back in, because then it's all kind of ready for when we stitch him onto the body. So again, when you're filling, just small bits, particularly small when it's something as fine as this, and have some sort of a tool is probably the easiest way to poke it right down in there. So we're only going to fill in his arm probably about halfway, if you can see on this one here, and then we're going to stitch across. And then we just need to hand stitch it in place. The reason we stitch them halfway across is so that there isn't so much bulk at the top here, and it kind of can move if we want to position things. It works really well for that sort of thing. So that's done. So now it just needs to be stitched onto his shoulder. So it's a little hand stitching exercise, works the best for this sort of thing. Funny little stray thread hanging around there. So now you can change, you could have him with his arms facing backwards, you can have them facing way forwards, you can have them hanging down straight. I quite like them to be just, so we're just going to stitch it onto the shoulder, right across the seam there. So I like to have them so that they're just coming forward. If you think about people, your arms are slightly forward, they're not usually back here in a normal position, so you just kind of want to look at that normal, unless you're doing something in particular, like if he's going to be, well, he can still hold things. So just think about the position a little bit. So this one here, you can see I've stitched it on an angle so that it'll just come forward a bit. So I'm hoping to do a similar thing on the other side now. And it's just a matter of stitching it in place, so nothing hard about that. So I'll go ahead and get his arm stitched on across the shoulder here, and I will show you how to start on his clothing. So we're going to, he's got two arms now, so we're going to start making his coat now. So his coat has got this strip all the way down the front here, and then these little stripy bands on the cuffs and down the bottom. So there's a pattern here for the coat, so I've cut both pieces out. It's front and back both the same, it doesn't open or anything. And then this little stripe down the centre here, I've already fused that on, and I've stitched either side. I've just used the red thread to fuse that down, just to create a little bit of interest on the front, although he does have a magnificent beard and you don't really see a lot of it. However, he could have a shorter beard. So now we want to go ahead and start we want to put this lower cuff on first. So to do that, I've just done a partial seam. We don't want to sew the whole thing up yet. We need to get into other places. So I've just stitched up to here, and I've pressed the seam towards the back. The stripe here is on the front. And I've already got my piece of fabric cut ready here. So it's just a wider strip folded in half, and I'm just going to sew it to the bottom edge here, but I'm going to place it underneath so that we're going to flip it up, and then that will take the raw edge inside there. So I'll go ahead and get this stitched on. So I've gone ahead and I've sewn that, so I sewed it onto the wrong side basically, and we just want to press that edge down now so that the seam ends up going up. And then we're going to press the whole piece up at the joining seam there, and then we're going to top stitch it in place. So now I'm just going to top stitch just a 1/4 of an inch down from this fold here, all the way along. So I'll go ahead and get that done. So that's looking pretty good. We're going to do the same thing now with the sleeves. So we want to do a partial seam on the top part of the sleeve here, and we can do it to both of them and get the cuffs put on. So I'll do this one just to show you how we're doing it. So I'm starting a little bit up on the sleeve here. So it's a little bit strange to be doing all these funny seams because it leaves us with a little bit of a funny shape here. However, it's the best way to get the cuffs on. Yeah, this way. And I'm just going to press that seam a little bit there. And then I've got some cuffs already cut here. So again, it's just a strip folded in half. And we're just going to stitch that again onto the wrong side. And then we can flip it over exactly the same as we've done this wider one here, and then we'll top stitch it down. So I'll go ahead and get the 2 cuffs done and then show you how we make up the rest of the coat. So we've got our cuffs on, we've got a very strange looking piece of something going on here. So now we're ready to do the side seams and the shoulder seams. So this one here that I'd already started, I think I'll finish this seam here. So we've got the cuff here, so we can stitch it all the way down to the end here. We're coming right up, and when we get into this point here, it's quite tight, but just come right up into a point and then we'll turn and go there. So I'll do that one so that you can see what I mean about that. So I'll just keep going where I stopped this partial seam. So I'm just coming up into that point, so I'm just going to go right up there and then pivot. So I've gone sort of well past the cut bit, and then I'll come down this side. And the other side is done the same, but we have to start all the way from the bottom. But when we've done a seam like this going right up into a point, again we just need to clip into that corner but not into it, stitching, and just a couple more little clips so that when we turn it out the right way we can get a nice little edge on that. And then on this shoulder seam, the same thing, we're just going to come up, there's some markings on the pattern that will tell you how close to come in to the top here, so we'll just do this one and then you'll see the whole half of it done. So the other side gets stitched exactly the same up to that same point here and all the way in there, and we have to clip into the corner. So I'll go ahead and do that and I'll show you, then we need to turn it out so I can show it to you at that stage. So I've gone ahead, I've finished all that sewing. The other thing I've done is I've pressed down at the neck edge here, that bit that was left open. I've pressed over the 1/4 inch here and to the front, and I've done a little gathering stitch, so it's actually quite big. It's not a little gathering stitch at all, it's quite a big gathering stitch. It's really just going to be just so that we can just pull it in a little bit round his neck, so nothing amazing, none of it gets seen. He has a magnificent beard, it covers everything just about. So now we're ready to turn it out the right way. I've clipped into my corners and things. No, I have not clipped into my corners. Look at that. Got so carried away with that neck, I forgot. So we'll turn it out the right way, turn the sleeves out. The sleeves are quite skinny. Santa did say that he is going to be doing a little bit of a workout because his arms seem a little skinny at the moment, he said, and he's got a lot of lifting to do later in the year. However, just for the moment, he's got quite skinny arms. It's quite exciting when it gets to this stage. So I just want to give all those seams a nice press now. Make sure everything's sitting well. Just want to bring that shoulders a little bit curved there. But that's all pulled out really nicely because we clipped into that corner. It's sitting really well there. It's always a bonus when it sits well there. So I think that's all looking pretty amazing. And he is ready to get dressed. So when I did the gathering thread, I knot the end of my gathering thread when I do that so that it can't pull through by mistake. But I've started and stopped at the centre of the back there. So now hopefully we can get him dressed and get his arms into his sleeves. Look at that. Should have put your hands up first, Santa. So that should push through into there okay. And we'll grab the other one out. And then we have to start on that magnificent beard. There he is. Looking good. Arms are looking pretty good. So now I'm just going to tie up this gather at the neck here. It doesn't have to be super tight or anything, it's really just to pull it in so that it is sitting in. Just sort of snug around his neck. So basically stress-free centre, this one. And that's pretty much all we have to do there. Oh, I think he is looking pretty good. Just make sure his arms don't get twisted in the process. I think they're looking pretty good though. So now we need to make his beard next. So I have used cotton mopping string for like floor mops and things. You can get cotton mop string, and I quite like that. You might have something else. You might have different, there's so many different yarns and knitting type yarns and things around these days that work really well for beards. You might have some cotton string. If you don't have any of those things, you might have just some light coloured fabric that you could just cut into tiny little strips and make it in a beard out of that. However, I'm going with a cotton mop. And I've already started getting his hair ready here, so you use a reasonable amount of it. I bought a humongous ball of cotton mop, like it was this big, and it's now about this big, so it's gradually working its way down. But it kind of comes out in clumps like this, so it's not just one strand at a time. And so for this sort of thing, that's actually quite good. So I've already gone ahead. So what I'm suggesting that we do is just have a piece of batting, just a small piece of batting. It has to be long enough to go all the way around his head, and a little bit. It's okay if it's a little bit longer. And I'm suggesting that we just stitch through all those layers of that string, or whatever it is that you're choosing to use, onto there. So we do need to keep some out for his moustache, because as well as his magnificent beard, he has a magnificent moustache. So I don't know what I've got there, 6 or 8 strands, something like that, that we can tie into a moustache. And then these other ones here, this end here is going to be trimmed, but we do need a bit of an end. So I'll show you this guy here. He actually, Santa does not have a whole lot of hair. We think he has a whole lot of hair. It's all down here. He is bald on top. How amazing is that? But what we're going to do is sew this onto the batting, and then that kind of sits all the way around his head, and we can trim all that to sit up under his hat. Probably would suggest that we do glue or stitch the hat on afterwards, but I thought you might like to just see that while we're getting him made. So I'm just going to put all this on here, and I'm just going to stitch that through. So I've already started here, and we want the majority of the, if there's sort of extra, make it extra thick in that centre bit here, because that's where his beard is, and you want more there than you do round the back perhaps, or something like that. So all it is putting it in the machine and stitching all the way across there through into the batting to hold it. So I'll go ahead and do that. I need a different colour thread in my machine to do that, so I'll get that done and show you what we're going to do next. So I'm just sewing across all this mountain of cotton mop here, and I'm leaving a little bit. I know that the batting piece is a little bit long, so I'm leaving a little bit sticking out the end. And that's really all it is. It's just a little holding stitch, keeps it all together in one place. It's kind of like Santa's sort of beard wig. And we can trim away some of this batting on the back as well. We don't need it all there, we just needed it so that we could sew something to it. So if it seems a bit bulky, particularly the top, the underneath bit probably doesn't matter as much, but it can be trimmed later if we find it's in the way. So now we do need a little bit of glue. You might have your preferred type of glue that you use. You might use a heat gun or something. I'm just using a liquid glue. I don't get on so well with heat guns. And all we want to do now is we'll pop some glue on his face, but we're just trying to, so my line of stitching is there, and we're going to be trimming near his face, right close to that, but not until after we've got it in place. So we just want to glue it so that it comes down, but then comes up around the back of his head a bit more. And we can overlap if we have overlap at the back there. So we just want to glue that in place, so we'll have to let it sit and dry while we do that. So I'll pop some glue on. And my bottle doesn't want to come out the top, so we're coming out this way. So I'm just going to glue him just down, not right up on his face, because we've got to give him a face yet as well. But we can come a bit higher around the back here. So this is a fairly fast drying glue. If you've got a glue that dries fairly quickly, that's good, so that it holds it all nicely and you don't have to hold it forever yourself. Hopefully that's enough to get it on there. So we want to just come around here and come up around on the back. Just take off a bit of that extra batting off there. And that can come around. So how are you looking in the front there? You're looking pretty good actually. So really you just need that glue to dry. So hopefully it'll start drying pretty soon and I can let go. And we'll make his hat while that's drying, I think. So my glue is drying, but we need to glue some of this hat, these shorter bits, up on his head to fit under his hat. So we kind of couldn't do it while all that other stuff was going on. And just a little bit to the front of his face, but not right over his face. And so there's some glue there now. So just these shorter bits, if we can push some of those up there. So we're going to trim those as soon as they're dry. I'll wait for them to dry a bit more yet. And then these bits around the front here, right at the front here, we can trim those right up close to that stitching, because they wouldn't really generally be hanging around there that much. So not the long strands, but these short ones, just trim them up close here. This won't particularly be seen because the moustache will be hanging over there, but it gets rid of some of this bulk, and these are shorter pieces, so it might not look so good to have all the short, unless you want a short and a long beard, up to you. I find it's good to get rid of some of this How are you doing here? Looking pretty good. Otherwise, I think that's all doing pretty well. Lurking in there. Oh, it is a long-bearded fella, this one. So that's all looking pretty good. I think that's all going to dry up there pretty soon. So then for his moustache, I've just tied a thread around the middle of this little group that I set aside. So it's just, the thread is actually still sitting there. I'll trim that off after I've glued it so that it's just a little thread around in the centre there, and we're just going to stick that on right above that bit that we've just trimmed. So I'll pop some glue on there as well. And then while that's all drying, I'm going to make his hat. So I might pop the glue on this bit here. And we just want to position that so that the centre, that little loop is in the centre there. How much fun is it to make a centre? Right, so I'm actually going to lay him down so that it's not pulling against it, and just leave that sit there for a few minutes, because we're going to make the hat now, so that that's all ready when he's ready. So the hat is already cut out, very similar to how we've done the edging on the clothing, the other part of the clothing. I've got my hat shape cut here. I've got the band just the same, folded in half, and we're just going to sew that around that curved edge, and we're going to sew it again to the wrong side of the piece of fabric so that it flips around to the right side. And this time I didn't do a top stitching. I thought we'd leave the little brim loose, but so now we just need to stitch it and just trim these little ends off. We just now need to stitch up the hat, so just all the way to the top there. Oh, we are nearly done. Got to give him a haircut yet though. So I'm just going to trim off that point, and I'm also going to trim off just that little point in the seam allowance there, just to take some of the bulk out from there. And we might need something to help us push that little point out as well. Long and skinny, his little hat here. Now if you want him to have a little bell or a pom-pom on, now would be the time to sew that on. So I'll go ahead and get the bell sewn on, by which time the glue should be dry and we can give him a haircut. So it's all looking pretty good. I'm just going to trim around all this top stuff to get out of the way of where his hat's going to go now. So just kind of around the top here, give him a little up haircut. It's not particularly essential that he has this hair in here, but it helps keep the hat on. And we'll make sure that the hat is going to go on at this stage, because it would be a bit sad if it wasn't. We can put his hat on. So if you wanted, so when I made this one here, I actually have stitched the hat down to the brim so that it sits in that position. You might prefer it in a different position. You might want it just hanging around. You might want it standing up, in which case you might need to put something in it. It's kind of up to you and him. It's your hat. But you may want to just bring that down. You could pop a little bit of glue, or you could stitch it, or just leave it. It's probably going to just sit there fine. I am going to suggest sticking the hat itself on though, so that it stays on. But in the meantime, we won't worry about the hat anymore just now. We're going to just have a look at his hair. Now it's really up to you how long you want it. We've got plenty of length here, and we've got the beard as well. So really it's a matter of how you want to go about that. So what I did with this one here, so the moustache is shorter, and then this is all beard, and I basically just sort of cut it slightly longer in the middle of the front, but a little bit obviously not even, and then kind of just kept that line coming around there. So if you want to do your hair differently, of course, that's entirely up to you. So this little moustache here, I might just trim that off sort of about there-ish, and there-ish. And I've still got that thread from when I tied the moustache off, so I might just cut that off. It's all caught up in the glue now, so we don't need to worry about that. So that's done. And then I think maybe somewhere about here works quite well. The strands move around a fair bit, so things don't kind of sit exactly, but that's part of its charm, I feel. And we'll come around the back here. It's got very long hair. He would probably look quite good with shorter hair. You may not want it this long. Oh, look, and it even matches up. How amazing is that? So he's almost done. He just can't see anything yet because he hasn't got any eyes. So for the eyes, so he kind of, his hands get a bit lost in there. So now his hands, if you were wanting him to hold something, they could come across and could be holding something or anything you like, really. From here on in, he's all yours. So when I'm going to give him eyes, now the hat is going to sit probably about there, so that you just see really his eyes just above. He has a little nose and two eyes. So I'm just going to do the eyes with a pen. You could stick a couple of pins in where you think they're going to go, but really there's not a lot of places for the two eyes to go, but I do have to be looking at him. So I'm just going to go here. And I like to just keep their faces really simple. Just two little dots for eyes. And then I've got these are the Micron Pigma pens. These are permanent on fabric. I've got a red one here, and I'm just going to mark a nose in here. So it's just, this moustache sits right under that nose, and this pen is not working as well as it usually does, but here it just has a little rosy nose, and that's looking pretty good, I think. So it's really as simple as that, and I think we now have a pair of centres, and who knows what they're going to get up to. Mischief, I'm thinking. Quite happily there. So this has been a very busy project, this one. But some things are busy. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you again with the next Christmas idea.